Posljednjih meseci u javnosti se polemiše da li je na protestu u Beogradu 15. marta upotrebljena neka vrsta zvučnog oružja. Vlast u Srbiji to negira. Međutim, međunarodna nevladina organizacija Earshot, koja se bavi audio istraživanjima, kaže da se tada najverovatnije desio usmereni zvučni napad. Zato danas razgovaramo sa audio istraživačima Fabijom Ćervijem i Adnanom Nakvijem.
I would like to start with in the very beginning. Earshot was contacted by activists in Serbia to investigate the possible use of sonic weapon during the vigil in Belgrade. What was the moment for you, or the piece of information that made you think, okay, we need to look into this more closely?
Well, when the silent vigil happened, immediately after, we had been contacted by dozens of protesters, not just activists, but also protesters who sent us videos directly. And already from that, we were really interested in this kind of volume of contacts, of people that got in touch, that asked us to investigate what they had experienced, what they had heard. And this led us then to analyze, in the beginning, 12 recordings, and this then led us to find in 4 of these recordings artifacts which were consistent with sonic weapons. After this process, we then got in contact with CRTA, with whom we collaborated to organize 15 in-depth ear witnesses interviews, and also to analyze these over 3,000 testimonies, 3,244 testimonies to be exact.
And can you maybe walk us through the whole investigation? How did that look like? Okay, you got the videos and you had some testimonies, but how did the whole investigation process look like?
So when we analyzed all the witness testimonies, the written statements, we began to sort through all the descriptions that they were kind of writing as to what they had heard. A vast majority of these witnesses described a sound that they had never heard before. And 72% were, 60% were using multiple sounds to describe what they had heard. They were using sounds like the sound of a jet engine, or the sound of cavalry, the sound of motorbikes or of race cars. And as we were reading through these testimonies, we were creating a kind of audio library. So we were saving samples of these sounds, which we would then prepare to play back to the ear witness interviews. These interviews were conducted over the course of 3 days. They were one-on-one interviews with each witness, and they lasted about 30 minutes. And throughout the interviewing process, we asked them in their own words initially to recount what they remember from the evening, what they remember from the silent vigil before the attack, and then what they remembered from the attack. And what emerged was an extremely consistent recollection of not just what kind of sound they had heard, but also of this kind of acute awareness of the sounds around them. All the witnesses described with very high detail sounds of very distant coughs 200 meters away, or the sound of drones flying up in the air in the distance, or even the sound of a popcorn machine. So they were very acutely kind of reconstructing what they were hearing. And then when they started to describe the sound that they had heard, we began to play back the audio samples that we had collected. And through a process of elimination, we then were able to narrow down with extreme consistency 3 sounds that the witnesses across the 15 ear witness interviews had heard. The first was the sound of a jet engine. The second was the sound of white noise, which is a synthetic sound that is unique in that it has intense frequencies across the whole audible frequency spectrum. And the third sound that witnesses were responding to was the sound of a very low 20 hertz frequency. This was a sound that we had played back with the intention to see if witnesses responded to a kind of physical sensation. Very low frequencies are associated with physical sensations. Also, as 20 hertz is close to the resonant frequency of the skull. So we were trying to see if witnesses were responding to a kind of physical as well as an auditory experience. So these three sounds were consistently acknowledged by the witnesses as being components of what they had heard on the evening.
Mm-hmm. And what was the most common feeling that it triggered, that sound that triggered to the ear witnesses that you mentioned?
I think that one of the most common feelings was this kind of physical sensation, and I think this draws on Fabio's last point, this 20 hertz sound that we identified. You know, this sound that is similar to, or is the resonant frequency of the skull. You know, one of the links that, or the implications that this sound has is one of physical sensation. And 72% of the witness statements we analyzed all testified to this kind of physical sensation. I think that was about 2,335 statements, all sort of consistently describe this aspect of the sound. Another aspect is the highly directional nature of the sound. You know, it was described by 11 of the 15 ear witnesses as a sound that was sort of onrushing towards them, or something that sort of approached them. Alongside that, there was you know, a strong consistency around the descriptions of it as a kind of machine-like sound. And then a sort of another sort of fundamental consistency was the kind of unfamiliarity of it, the kind of perceptual ambiguity. 60% of uh, 60% of witnesses needed at least two sounds to describe exactly what they were hearing. This points to the fact that it was not an easily identifiable or categorizable sound that they were hearing, but something that was actually very difficult to put words towards. So these kind of consistencies that were present within the verbal descriptions of the sound became sort of core parts of the foundation of our further investigative work.
And how that sound that they heard make them feel? Did they talk about that in the report?
Well, do you mean the sound that we had played back, or the way that they remembered the sound?
The way that they remember the sound. How did they say that they felt on March 15th when they heard the original sound?
One way that, across the ear witnesses, there was a consistent description of a sense of fear, a sense of impending danger, which, as Adnan was mentioning, was tied to the fact that this was an unfamiliar sound, that they could tell where the sound was coming from roughly. Witnesses described it coming from the north of Kralja Milana Boulevard towards Terazije. They could tell it was coming from that direction, but then they could not see what was making the sound. So together, these components created this kind of sense of impending danger that witnesses were describing, a sense of fear, as if something was approaching and then was going to fly over them. Literally, witnesses say that they felt, you know, I quote, 200 bikers approaching us and feeling as if they were going to run them over. And then, of course, as they can't see 200 bikers, and as the event happens, they are left in a state of fear, essentially. Yes.
Both of you mentioned ear witnesses. Can you explain the difference between an eyewitness that we often hear of and the ear witness that is mentioned in your report as well?
So an ear witness, as the term suggests, is a witness that has kind of experienced a violence and has experienced the violence through sound and has a kind of sonic recollection, as opposed to an eyewitness who has seen a kind of act of violence. The ear witness has a recollection of sound, but as our work focuses on sound, we have found throughout our previous works that there is a kind of lack of focus on the kind of sonic nature of forensic evidence and of evidence, especially. The founder of Earshot, Lawrence Abu Hamdan, has pioneered this technique of ear witness interviews, in which you create an environment specifically for people who have been subjected to a kind of sonic violence, and you create this environment where they can reconstruct what they have gone through, what has happened through the playback of audio, through kind of eliciting sonic memory and sonic recollection of what they have witnessed.
And you said you did 15 interviews and you read more than 3,000 testimonies, written testimonies. Is there any particular testimony or case that you that stood out for you, that you remember, like that it was strikingly memorable or especially interesting for you?
I can touch on maybe a couple of yeah, I think in the ear witness interviews there was one of the witnesses described the sound as kind of entering into them, or they said it was felt inside of me. Yeah, and you know, another said that it was, you know, described um, it was not actually that loud per se, but it was inside of them. So it kind of indicated this interesting acoustic phenomenon about this weapon. You know, it was of course, you know, there was a consistent testimony in the kind of the extreme loudness of it, but it was not just that. You know, it was a kind of uniquely directional feeling, something that had yeah, a kind of an embodied or physical sensation. Um, so I think this kind of terminology that pointed towards the extremely ambiguous nature of the sound, the fact that it was that hinted at its loudness, at its embodiedness, at its directionality, all at the same time without sort of having the core language to describe this kind of phenomenon. I think this was yeah, these moments in the ear witness interviews really stood out to me as pointing at a acoustic experience that not only is unique but is unique in the kind of fear and harm that it instills. It's really unlike anything people had heard before.
And if I can add to that, there were also two testimonies that stood out, which in which witnesses described the sound that they heard as and witnesses were able to describe what they had heard through a previous experience, particularly the experience of the 1999 NATO bombing. So this was really important in our analysis when we were going through these testimonies and realizing that the sound, the sonic attack, was used in a way that kind of triggered latent traumatic memories of violence, memories of war, particular to the context of Serbia. So this was an interesting kind of connecting point in between a sound that was so anomalous in its nature, but connected to a very distinct physical kind of experience.
And can a sonic weapon affect people after the attack? Can they feel something after they felt the attack of a sonic weapon?
Yes, of course. The main kind of obvious impact of being exposed to a sonic weapon is loss of hearing, of tinnitus, and of potential psychological traumatic kind of exposure. But again, our investigation focuses more on the kind of reconstruction of the sound of the event rather than the aftermath. And for that, we would point to a kind of medical expertise.
And how confident are you that in the conclusion that some kind of a sonic weapon was used in Belgrade? Are you like 100% confident or?
In all our investigations, in all forensic work, we cannot say with 100% confidence, but our conclusion and our findings show that it is highly likely that protesters were subject to a sonic attack using a highly directional acoustic weapon.
And could the sound have been caused by the movement or behavior of the crowd that simply echoed through the space? Do you rule that option out entirely?
Yeah, a big part of the ear witness interviews and the way that they were designed and the kind of the methodology within them was to be able to assess the acoustic analytical capacities of the ear witnesses, of those who were present during the silent vigil. And one of the sort of key questions or the lines of questioning that took place was a attempt to distinguish the sounds that we would play back or the sounds that they described as being part of the attack with sounds of a stampede or with sounds of um, uh, sounds present just in the ambient noise, like a popcorn popping or the drone above them. And we found that there was a consistent capacity for ear witnesses to be able to differentiate between um, what they described as the sonic weapon and the ambient noise present on the day and the sound of the crowd, the onrushing sound of the crowd that emerges. So we I think a core part of our methodology was to show that there is this acoustic analytical capacity that distinguishes the auditory experience of the sonic weapon versus sounds that could have been caused by crowd movement.
Just to clarify, ear witnesses consistently said that the sound of the crowd was not what they were hearing. The sound of the crowd was a separate event from the sound of the attack. That was a kind of consistent conclusion that ear witnesses were describing.
Was there anything in the testimonies that surprised you, maybe that was contradictory or it stood out?
Well, yes. I mean, when obviously in having conducted these ear witness interviews, the nature of describing a sound that is indescribable essentially comes with many layered contradictions. This is commonly associated with describing sounds in general. I mean, there's some kind of filtering kind of language that needs to be used to describe a sonic memory. But nonetheless, it was surprising to see how witnesses could reconstruct through words what they had heard with a wide range of of references and of sounds and memories and sensations.
Initially, when you started the investigation, you considered the use of a device called Vortex Cannon, but eventually it shifted focus. What was the evidence that made you rule that option out?
So when we started the investigation, as I mentioned, we started by analyzing 12 videos, and we had found in 4 of those videos sounds that were consistent with the Vortex Cannon, sounds that we could find faintly in the recording. And after publishing that short video, we then approached ear witnesses. We then analyzed over 3,000 statements, and we started to see how the statements and the ear witnesses' recollections of the sound would diverge in 2 key ways. The first, which was very directly in the playback of several sound samples that we had prepared for the ear witnesses, the ear witnesses would categorically rule out the sound of a Vortex Cannon, which we had taken from the open source. So on this line already, ear witnesses were clearly able to say that the sound was not present in what they had experienced. The second way was in the descriptive words, in the most common descriptive words that ear witnesses would use to describe the sound, which would be a sound of machinic quality and of vehicle-like quality. Now, these are sounds that are very artificial in nature, which in themselves point to a different kind of sonic weapon than the vortex cannon. This is because the vortex cannon is a device that produces sound through pressurized air. So it is, in essence, an analog kind of sound-making device, which differs from how witnesses were describing the sound, machinic, vehicle-like, like race cars or motorbikes. These are very mechanical sounds that kind of point to a different direction. And through these two points, we then decided to shift our investigation away from the vortex cannon.
And that's when you actually focused on LRAD, or a long-range acoustic device, actually specifically the 450 XL model, right? What was the thing that you connected with LRAD? What from the testimonies could you connect with exactly that model of device?
I think from the testimonies, what we really get is a kind of consistency around the sound or the auditory experience that was experienced and felt. Um, I don't know. I don't know if our conclusions take us to identify that exactly with a particular kind of weapon, but a lot of our analysis was whether the LRAD 450 XL could have been consistent with what has been described, and the yeah, with the kind of auditory experiences that were described, and in that sense, we believe that the LRAD 450 XL cannot be ruled out, given what witnesses have described. Yeah.
If I can jump in on that point, yes. So the testimonies of the ear witnesses in many ways are consistent with the LRAD 450 XL and how the LRAD 450 XL functions. Witness accounts speak of a very directional kind of sonic experience. The LRAD 450 XL is a device that projects sound in an extremely directional manner. It has an array microphone system in its kind of inbuilt form that focuses sound waves across distances up to 1.7 kilometers, according to the LRAD specification. So in this way, the kind of directional nature of how witnesses were describing the sound is consistent with how the LRAD works. So in this way, our analysis, while it doesn't say conclusively that it was an LRAD, it was important for us to show how its use cannot be ruled out, given also the evidence that has been publicly available that the LRAD was seen present on the day and was made public through members of parliament.
Yeah, just to explain to our audience, LRAD 450 XL is actually owned by the Serbian police, and as you said, was present at the protest on March 15th. And you, in the report, you suggest that the absence of LRAD sound in video recordings can actually support its use, not disprove. Can you maybe explain that?
Yeah. So yeah, a major part of our investigation focused on this question of why are we not hearing sort of a clear, identifiable audible trace on the recordings. And we kind of approach this with sort of four sort of key factors. And one of them was based on an analysis on the LRAD 450 XL, and its kind of highly directional propagation or nature of propagation. It has a kind of patented and unique acoustic array system which allows it to propagate sounds in an extremely directional manner. And what that means is that outside of that sort of directional front beam, as described in the LRAD technical specifications, there is a sort of drop off in sound intensity or perceived loudness. And this means that just small tilts or small rotations in the direction of the LRAD um, can lead to quite large discrepancies or drop-offs in perceived loudness, and ultimately meaning that the sound of the LRAD itself could become indistinguishable or quieter than the sound of the ambient noise or the sound of that was present on the recordings at the time. Um, this is also compounded by the fact that the LRAD's front beam or how directional it is can actually be controlled to be sort of even more directional and therefore even create even larger drop-offs in volume with movements of the actual weapon. This is, another factor was the fact that the LRAD can play any sound. It is not just focused on a siren or any sort of MP3 can be uploaded to the LRAD and played um, through it. And this is important because some sounds for example white noise are able to are much more difficult to differentiate from ambient noise than say for example a siren, which has a very sort of specific frequency behavior. Then if we sort of compound this with the kind of sound absorption levels of sort of thousands of people gathering, and the onset of the sound from the crowd, and we can and this also in relation compounded by the nature of recording devices, the nature of speech intelligibility algorithms, and the sort of compression modes that a lot of recording devices have. If we take all of these into account, it led us to a direction to why this may have not been heard on the recordings. But sort of a key sort of aspect of this is kind of the first point that was mentioned, that this kind of hinges upon this really directional front beam, which is sort of really specific to the way in which the LRAD itself propagates sound. So when we sort of find the absence of sound here interesting or still indicative of the possible use of an LRAD is because of the actual way the LRAD itself works. It's this highly directional nature of sound, which means that it is very plausible for cameras and recording devices along the street to have not been able to catch or pick up the sound as it was experienced, and explaining this sort of discrepancy between what was recorded and what was heard by people.
Are you maybe familiar with any similar case where LRAD was used during the protests somewhere in the world? Or any other sonic device?
Well, yes, our research looked also initially in the kind of history of sonic weapon use, and these techniques of crowd control. These are weapons of crowd control as they are advertised on their websites, have been used since the early 2000s for crowd dispersal, essentially. Now, there are several ongoing kind of like research strands and movements to kind of address the implications and the health effects, which are still relatively unknown. But yeah, again, our work focused more on the kind of unique conditions of the silent vigil in Serbia, and on the fact that a mass auditory experience has not really been kind of analyzed in such a way. The silent vigil and the sonic attack is quite an exceptional circumstance, and so the kind of the experience of the sound as described by the ear witnesses becomes to us more interesting than what kind of weapon was used. I mean, people were attacked, and their experience is being denied. And so the efforts to kind of focus on the ear witnesses and the protesters is central to our argument, and it takes a precedent in the claims that we have made.
Okay, yeah. I would actually like to go back to technicalities of LRAD just for a quick moment. Do you know if it's easy to operate that device, or is it like necessary to have some sort of training? Are you familiar with that information?
With that information, we haven't looked at how to exactly operate an LRAD. We obviously do not have access to an LRAD, and our investigation focuses more on the witnesses' perspective and on the witnesses' recollection of the event, and on reconstructing through the consistency of their testimonies what they had heard, to kind of materialize this experience and to kind of give credit to the shared experience of thousands of people.
The manufacturer of LRAD, Genesis, stated that its equipment was not used during the Belgrade protest. How do you comment on that?
Well, again, our analysis focuses on the ear witness testimonies. Our conclusions state that it is highly likely they were subjected to a sonic attack with a highly directional weapon. And our conclusions also suggest that we cannot rule out the use of an LRAD. Yeah, I would say that.
Okay. And you said your report suggests that the sonic weapon was possibly used in the protest, and Serbian authorities deny the use of any sonic device. To support their claim, they invited both the US FBI and the Russian FSB to investigate. We don't know if FBI has responded, but the FSB report claims that no acoustic weapon was used and suggests that the crowd showed no signs of acute distress and that disturbance was triggered by pyrotechnics. How do you respond to that interpretation?
Well, again, so our investigation looks at several of those claims made by the FSB report, and we challenge many of those claims. Through the ear witnesses, we can clearly see that there was a sense of fear, a sense of impending danger that witnesses described. There were also some facts that the FSB report had mentioned which are just factually incorrect. The FSB report mentions how the operational distance of the LRAD is limited to up to 600 meters. That is just not what the technical specification of the weapon shows. The weapon has an effective range of 1.7 kilometers, which is over the distance of Kralja Milana Boulevard. And the kind of allegation that the disorder, as they claim, was kind of triggered by what they mentioned, pyrotechnic and incendiary devices, is also demonstrated through the ear witnesses' faults. As I mentioned, the ear witnesses were able to acutely and in a detailed manner kind of recollect what they were hearing and they could distinguish very clearly all the sounds that they were hearing, and the sound that they heard which caused this kind of mass panic was something completely different from those sounds. In our playback of the sound samples in the interviews, witnesses also ruled out the sounds of fireworks. So in this way, ear witnesses clearly were able to differentiate this very unique different sounding character from the sounds that the FSB report claims were triggering the disorder.
And as you said, for your report, you went through more than 3,000 testimonies of people who were present on the protest. Do you expect the Serbian government to respond to your findings?
Well, as an open source organization, we welcome any feedback, any kind of analysis, and we're open to see what anyone kind of responds to our findings. They are open, they are publicly accessible on our website, on earshot.ngo, and we welcome all kinds of feedback.
What does this case tell us about the evolving nature of protest suppression? And how important is audio forensics evidence in uncovering those tactics?
Audio forensics, as our organization has shown through over 40 investigations across the world, is a field that is kind of illustrating how there is a missing kind of angle in how to investigate and analyze cases of violence. What we often find is that sound is left as a kind of secondary form of evidence, and a kind of methodology that revolves around sonic investigation is becoming more and more important, given that so much of attacks from state entities and corporate entities are being recorded on phones and recording devices. So there is this presence of open source material that comes directly from the witness, which contains a kind of sonic as well as a visual component, which demands a kind of its own form of investigative work. Sound in itself is there is so much more information in sound if we want to break it down to a kind of to this kind of description. Videos are recorded at 24 frames per second, but sound is recorded at 44.1 thousand samples per second. So just in the volume of data collected, that in itself speaks to a kind of need to investigate through a sonic kind of lens.
And
just to
yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, just to jump in on that, I think that the use of audio forensics or the ear witness interview in this as a methodology in this case, what it enables in these conversations around police suppression or crowd suppression is a focus really on the experiences of the witness and the mobilization of technologies of audio forensics, the history of audio forensics, and emerging methodologies to help articulate and materialize the experience of witnesses. And I think really in in this report and in this investigation, as we sort of started to conduct it and as we went further into it, I think one of the sort of most striking elements is the fundamental consistency across 3,000 written statements, around 3,000 written statements, and the 15 ear witness interviews. This is really unprecedented in the kind of ear witness interviews that Earshot and its founder have undertaken in the past. It really points to a shared auditory experience, and as an organization, we believe that open source investigation, audio forensics can be mobilized for the kind of articulation and the mobilization of witness experience in the face of police suppression or other forms of suppression. Yeah.
As you said, protest suppression and police suppression. Should people be afraid of use of sonic weapons in the protest in the future?
Well, we hope that our report gets read by the public and that the public familiarizes with the kind of impact, the individual impact, and the collective impact of what sonic weapons do to crowds. So in a way, the report is also a way for the public to access this kind of knowledge and to be aware of what of the dangers that this type of weapon comes with.
And what's next? Should some institution respond to your findings? What's the next step?
Well, yeah, I think that our work has consistently been, from the moment it started, has been a response to to witnesses that heard something and felt that what they had heard was not being recognized. And every sort of step of our investigation was an attempt to materialize, to build on the testimony that those witnesses provided, and to make what was heard more legible. And I think now that our report is public, we firstly welcome, as you mentioned earlier, any form of further engagements with different parties. You know, this is the nature of open source investigation of transparent research practices. But any manner in which our work and our methods can be used to further extend the claims of witnesses, this is the direction that Earshot takes.
Thank you so much for your time. It was so pleasant talking to you.